Hello and welcome to Newsroom. We're coming to you live from Islamabad and I'm Sharmeen Ali. More tensions between China and the United States over allegations of the origins and spread of the coronavirus. And in the most recent developments, President Donald Trump has said that the United States will be powerfully supporting those industries like airlines and others that are particularly affected by the China virus. He used that particular term as early as this last Monday. And then on Tuesday, he said that some of his states in his country that are being hit by the Chinese virus, he said, are being hit practically hard, and some are not being hit at all. So again, references to the China virus in President Trump's terminology, and then in return, Chinese officials are promoting theories that the virus was brought to China by the US Army. So again, the blame game continues. And what is that going to cause, the impact on the entire world, especially during the US-China trade war and trade agreement earlier this year, which seems to be going backwards now instead of forwards. We'll be talking about that. Also, tensions between the United States and Iran are also pretty high at the moment. The Irani President Hassan Rouhani said that there will be a crushing response if the United States government goes ahead with extending an embargo of the trade of conventional arms, which the UN is due to lift later this month. And this is after the Iran nuclear deal was signed several years back, and the United States pulled out of that deal in 2018. So the United States might try and block the lifting of this embargo. So at that, the Irani president has said that there will be retaliation, a crushing response from the Iranis, which is a very, it's not a very settling statement. And the situation, the way it's been between the US and Iran recently in the Strait of Hormuz has not exactly been settling either. So we'll be talking about that with our guests in our studios. Also, further belligerence by the Indian side, again, more firing across the line of control where innocent civilians are being killed in Azad Kashmir, and this by the Indian Army. And it's been a situation where we're seeing in the last month and a half where both the countries should be focusing on fighting the coronavirus. Instead, we're seeing more and more aggression from the Indian side, statements by Indian leaders against Pakistan, aggressive ones are also coming out. And now Pakistan may approach the United Nations to ask that India provide proof of their propaganda against Pakistan, where India claims that Pakistan has terror launch pads. In some very positive news that has just happened is that 3 Kashmiri journalists have received the Pulitzer Prize. These are journalists with the Associated Press. Their names are Channi Anand, Dar Yasin and Mukhtar Khan. They received this particular award, the Pulitzer Prize, which is a highly prestigious award for their striking images of life in the valley. They've been capturing protests, the funerals of slain freedom fighters in Indian-occupied Kashmir, and the plight of the victims and their pain. They've been documenting. And this is proof that the world is recognizing what's happening in Indian-occupied Kashmir, and that it's recognizing through these journalists the plight of the Kashmiris over there. And now we're going to begin with our first topic. We have with us online Raja Faisal, who's a journalist. Thank you, Raja Faisal, for joining us on the program.
Thank you, Sharmeen.
So let's begin with the tussle that we're seeing between the United States and China. That, okay, we've been hearing naturally that there's a war of words going on between the US and China in the past couple of days, weeks, even in the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. We heard President Trump calling it the Wuhan virus. And then again on Monday and Tuesday, he's made new statements calling it the China virus twice, actually. And Beijing has responded by saying that it's indignant about the phrase that's being used, the Chinese coronavirus. And they said that it's a stigmatization. Your take on this, please.
Sharmeen, you are very right. And since we had this COVID-19, statements coming from the American side, they have actually hyped the situation. Uh, one can easily judge that the statements which were coming from the Trump administration, they shouldn't have come. Since the early days, they started calling it coronavirus. They're calling it Chinese virus and Wuhan virus, which was, not good at part of the diplomatic mission of the U.S. The diplomacy played at the hands of Trump in this crisis, it's really bad. And as you have seen that recently, I mean, world leaders, um, they talked about having a unity. They need to stay united against coronavirus, and they have collected a fund of more than $7 billion just to create a vaccine to counter the COVID-19, which is something for a hope, and it's a ray of hope for the world population. At the same time, what we see is US was absent from there, which is really sad. And rather than being there, US is having a campaign against China, and they are contacting diplomatic missions of the world, and they want alliances against Chinese to highlight this issue, that this was sort of virology lab was used to create this virus and to destroy the world. And this is I think utter nonsense. And at the same time, Pompeo calling it enormous evidences were collected that the coronavirus was actually initiated by the Chinese. And what we see, that there is a reaction from the Chinese side uh, regarding this. Of course, it is natural that they are reacting to it. And most recently, we have seen that one of the newscasters of Chinese national television, he has used the words spitting venoms or spitting poison for Pompeo, whatever Pompeo has said.
Right.
So things are really bad, and things are not going good. At that
Right.
time when the world required unity, unity is not there.
Right. So, in the beginning of this pandemic, officials in China did say that it originated in the Wuhan wildlife market. Now, even they're saying that the origin is not known. And even the director of national intelligence in the United States has said that the origin of the virus is not fully understood at this point. So, it's a bit premature to say where it actually came from right now.
Exactly. Even EU countries, very responsible countries, they are giving the statements that this is not initiated by humankind. Of course, it is something natural that has actually originated from who knows where. Like, it can be from the animals, and it can be from anywhere, but it is not confirmed that whether it is started at Wuhan or somewhere else. So when things are not clear, then I think on part of Americans, it is highly irresponsible of American Trump administration to claim that it has been started by the Chinese, and a smear campaign against them. It is quite irresponsible of them.
Right. The Xinhua news agency has said that using racist and xenophobic names to cast blame for the outbreak reveals a politician's irresponsibility and incompetence, which will intensify virus fears. So, what they're essentially saying is that the politicians who have not responded appropriately are using xenophobic names to cast blame for the pandemic.
Yeah, and Shabin, it is a fact that so many Chinese and Far Eastern countries, from Far Eastern countries, so many people, they are living in Europe, so many people, they are living in Americas and Canada, and just because of this reason, this campaign, they are facing racism, utter racism. I mean, on BBC, on every channel, it is being shown that things are not good in the society. I mean, they are racially abused, and I don't know why it is going on, and just to blame it like giving the names like Chinese virus and Wuhan virus, and this is not good, this is not going good, because it would have implications. And I
Right.
think America need to be more responsible at this time.
Right. The New York City Mayor, Bill de Blasio, he tweeted that our Asian American communities, people you serve, are already suffering. They don't need you to be fueling more bigotry. This is what he tweeted about President Trump's statements, because there's due to be a backlash for the Asian American communities, just like we've seen the backlash that has taken place for the Muslim communities in other parts of the world, like India.
Exactly. I mean, that's what I was about to mention. That just for instance, just look in what is happening in India. What Trump is doing with China, Modi is doing with the Muslims in India. I mean, it is like marginalizing someone. It is like giving someone a name and just spreading it everywhere, and them implications would be waiting around the corner. I mean, whatever is happening in New York, whatever is happening in America and in Europe right now, things are happening in India as well for the Muslims. So these sort of statements, they need to be responsible enough to give these kind of statements.
Right. We have also joining us now online Dr. Manzoor Afridi, who is a foreign affairs expert. Thank you for joining us online.
Thank you very much.
So we were just talking about the spread of these sort of disinformation campaigns, you can call it, that we've seen happening across India, blaming the Muslims. We're seeing now that the United States president keeps calling the coronavirus the Chinese virus. The Chinese officials have responded to this and saying that it is unacceptable. It's spreading xenophobic fears. So at a time like this, the spread of disinformation, how do you feel that this should be dealt with?
Well, it is very unfortunate that great powers they blame each other because this coronavirus COVID-19 it is a natural disease, and I think one country should not be blamed for that for it. Because yes, you rightly said that the U.S. President Donald Trump has called it as the China virus, but look on the other side that China has overcome this pandemic, and China has also sent medical teams to facilitate other countries, not only to Pakistan, but to other even European countries. China has also offered to send its medical teams and the kits, all the facilities, medical equipment to even United States of America. So we have a very great example in this regard that how China has experienced this disease, and now even the superpower, I would call it the sole superpower of the world, United States, is not in a position to control this disease. And even there are so many protests in Ohio, in Austin, in Texas, within the United States. The people, they went to the streets and they are just condemning the policies of the Donald Trump. So I think where a disease has just engulfed the entire planet. It is across the world, so one country should not be blamed for this. And there are various reasons for this blame game, and the biggest one that is the trade war. So this pandemic happened amid the trade war between the U.S. and China. So that is why Donald Trump is just want to cash this pandemic and to use it for its own next term presidency. And even U.S. has not only condemned and criticized China for this. Donald Trump has also criticized Barack Obama, the previous president of the U.S., that why he was so generous towards China regarding the bilateral trade. And we have all seen and observed the policies of Donald Trump, how he restricted imports and exports, and how he made crackdown on the Huawei company of
Right.
People's Republic of China. So we have to
Right.
look
Thank you,
all these
Dr.
things.
Manzoor Afridi, for joining us on the program. Raja Faisal, now coming back to you, the WHO has also said that there are more cases and deaths in other countries other than China. We've seen that the UK has surpassed Italy in the number of deaths and cases. The United States has over 1,238,040 cases and 72,284 deaths as of today. And as we're also seeing, the curves are sort of flattening out with the new cases in almost all the European countries and America. The new cases, new deaths every day. It seems like it's also coming down a bit. So the hype that we're seeing right now, many say that this is due to the upcoming elections and the fact that the United States is facing the biggest recession since the Great Depression, like the rest of the world. President Donald Trump will go stronger in blaming China for that, for the virus.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we already know that midterms were only around the corner, and we just saw COVID-19 appearing. At this time, I think why Americans are, pushing China is the only reason is that they, you know, we already know that they were having a trade war going on with China. To fuel that and to help that, of course, they needed something to gain to go to talk about Chinese. And at the same time, the very important thing is they are already trying to get in touch with the countries, with the powerful countries as well, just to lobby against China on the matter of COVID-19, which I think they would not be successful. Reason being, European Union. If we talk about G7 countries, I mean, we already know that G7 countries they have helped WHO, and they are on the board with the WHO when
Right.
WHO was neglected by the Trump administration. I mean, Trump has
Right.
been criticized by WHO for so
Right.
long. At the same
Right.
time, we have.
Thank you, Raja Faisal, for joining us on our program now. The next issue that we are going to talk about is another very tense one that's happening right now. It's been happening over several months now, since actually last year. US-Iran tensions have been increasing again, and President Hassan Rouhani has threatened to give a crushing response if the United States goes against and actually goes for extending an embargo against for trade of conventional arms. And the UN wants to actually lift this later on this year. So if the United States goes against the lifting of this embargo, President Rouhani has made this statement that they will give a crushing response. We're going to talk to Javed Rana, who's a senior journalist and who's with us online right now. Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Thank you.
President Hassan Rouhani's statement that they will give a crushing response if the United States opposes the lifting of this embargo of trade of conventional arms. What is your feedback on this? Do you think that the United States will oppose it? And what could the response be from Iran?
I think there are two categories. First category is the UN Security Council resolutions. This embargo is going to end in October this year, and it cannot be extended until these veto power wielding countries support the US. That is the most unlikely scenario to happen. The Russia and the China is not going to support the US on this particular point. And then there was another particular clause which was in JCPO, this nuclear deal. Had USA not revoked this particular deal in 2018, then the US could have struggled legally to reimpose these arm embargoes on Iran. So that scenario is also not there since the US is no longer a party. We have heard the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo making some sort of arguments that in one way or the other they are still party to the JCPO, which I think is not the case. It is a public knowledge that they have already exited from the JCPO. Now then there is a bigger picture, and the bigger picture is that the both China and Russia, they are very much keen to sell their arms to the Iran, and therefore there is a I don't see any remote possibility for the Americans to get the support of Russia and China, though they can get it from France and Britain. So in that scenario, the reimposition of this embargo is not there. So what are the options? That is a bigger question. And I think the options are with the United States that they are going to impose their own sanctions, reimpose, or I would say rather the more appropriate words would be tighten their sanctions on Iran directly and indirectly. That option is there. I think they are going to, in one way or the other, they are going to pressurize European countries to reimpose their own embargoes on Iran and tighten its own. So I think these all kind of public rhetorics coming from Iranian president, that is more meant for the public consumption in Iran. But legally speaking and politically and geostrategically speaking and the diplomatic environment that exists on the ground now, I don't see it has much relevance other than the facts that this embargo is most unlikely to be extended, at least in a manner that the US is wishing.
Right. Now, coming back to the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, President Rouhani said that the US, in exiting this deal, made a quote-unquote stupid mistake. And they've also, the Iranis have threatened to sort of roll back on their commitments on this deal. And we saw them increasing their uranium stockpile earlier. What is, in your opinion, going to happen with this if the Iranis want that the US should lift all the sanctions that are already there because their economy is suffering? So what is going to happen in this situation going forward?
Well, I think Iran is also like US. They are also in a kind of situation where they are contradicting themselves. Iran at one time is saying that they are actually not fully complying with this deal when it comes to the nuclear deal, because basically they were trying to pressurize the European Union countries, some of the European Union countries, that if you don't listen to us in terms of implementing the nuclear deal, then the next option for us is that we are not going to completely comply with this deal. So that means that Iran was virtually also not in compliance, somewhat like US, though US position is a bit different. So Iran's, though that threatening game in fact has not worked, and the underlying concern by the US and the Israelis that after 2025 Iran will be managing to make a nuclear bomb. At least they can start it. There are clauses within the JCPO which gives sufficient leverage to Iran where they can manufacture a nuclear bomb. And because of these reasons, I think because of these reasons, the US had exit from this deal. It was more under pressure from Israel than of its own geostrategic reasons. But giving you the bigger picture, at this particular point of time, Iran is in a very difficult situation. They need these sanctions to be lifted very badly. Economy has gone from bad to the worst. There have been riots in the past, and somehow the government is managing its affair. But the kind of the situation that the Iranians are going through, I think it would not be that easy for the Iranian regime to cope with the situation, to sustain the situation. They are looking for some sort of concessions, at least from the countries in the Europe. They are not getting, because the US is tightening its screw on the European Union, and because of their economic interest with the US, they have not been as much helpful to Iran as they were expecting. China is very much eager. They have invested hundreds of billions of dollars in Iran. Russia certainly is going to come in a big way, at least in terms of selling arms to Iran. But again, for Iranian governments, they are sandwiched on one side in the diplomacy and on the other side the kind of the strong rhetorics they've been engineering with their people. Now it has become difficult for them to sustain with it.
Right. We also have joining us online now Kanbar Naderi, who is an Irani journalist. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on your program.
Mr. Naderi, now, can you please, in your opinion, the situation right now, how tense is it between the United States and Iran? We've seen tensions in the Strait of Hormuz. We're seeing that now with the trade embargo on conventional arms due to be lifted later this year, the U.S. could block that, and also the nuclear deal, the Trump administration having gone back on that in 2018. We've seen a lot of different acts going on of hostility between the countries. So where do you think it stands at the moment?
Well, we have to look at the history for the past 40 years or so. I don't think that Iran is going to back down from its rightful position to get, conventional weapons after the arms embargo by the United Nations. It is lifted in less than 3 or 4 months. If the United States manages to force the remaining signatories to the nuclear deal, I mean Russia, China, and the European Union, and maintain that arms embargo on Iran, I'm afraid Iran is going to take some drastic measures, and that will include getting out of the nuclear non-proliferation treaty, NPT, and of course the nuclear deal. There is no doubt about it that Iran doesn't see the economic and military benefits of this historic deal. It has no choice but to walk out, and that's precisely what Iranian officials have threatened. Even the military personnel and generals have threatened that they are willing to do if this scenario happens at the United Nations. But with regard to the tensions between Iran and the United States, we have seen similar tensions over the past couple of months, especially after they assassinated Iranian general in Iraq, and Iran retaliated by hitting with missiles the U.S. bases in Iraq. So if there is this kind of a repetition of this scenario, I'm afraid there will be tit for that. If the U.S. government military might attacks Iran and makes good on its threat, Iran has no choice but to retaliate.
Right. And recently we also saw that a small force of boats belonging to Iran's Revolutionary Guards, they surrounded U.S. Navy ships as well. That was also a point where things got very tense, but then the tension seemed to have gone down a little bit.
Well, I have been working with these people closely. I have seen them how they protect the security of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. I think we need to come to our senses and realize that the region doesn't need its security being ensured by the United States and its forces in the region. All we need to do is sit down together with other regional countries, act like adults in the room, and sort out our differences, and at the same time form a coalition to take care of our own security matters in this volatile region. Last thing we want is of outside powers to come and tell us how to take care of our own business of security in this part of the world. I think it is not Iran, it is the United States that is trying to fuel tensions in the region, because it has vested interest in this part of the world with regard to selling arms and getting money, and of course getting oil from Saudi Arabia and other countries in the region. I mean, it's good for business. They sell weapons. They get paid for the security of the Persian Gulf, and at the same time they get the chance to keep their forces in the region to threaten each and everybody, even Iran. So it is not Iran that is creating tensions. It is, I'm afraid, the United States. It has to go. The U.S. government and its forces need to leave the region and let the region decide for itself how it wants to manage its own security. There is no reason, there is no point in having outside powers in the region. We can take care of our own business.
Right. So we seem to be having some technical difficulties with Kanbar Naderi. Raja Faisal, if you're still with us online now, Iran's economy is also naturally hit due to these sanctions, and now with the coronavirus pandemic, there's a shortage of healthcare and medicines, etc. over there. So, what situation is happening right now in Iran with the COVID-19 pandemic? Oh, sorry, Javed Rana.
Well, the Iranians have lost thousands of people, and on an average, 70 to 80 people are dying every day because of COVID-19. And I think part of the problem is deeply lies with the Iranian regime, because they were more engaged in kind of conspiracy theories. They thought it was a Western hoax. It is not the kind of the disease that they are projecting in the Western televisions. And then they had their parliamentary elections, and then there was also no regulation at the Kumbh, which is one of their Shia holy shrine, and there have been gathering of people from all over these Shia Muslims. They're coming over there. So because of those reasons, I think this pandemic spread over there, and it has become extremely difficult for them to handle it. Partly, their health infrastructure has been very poor, and partly it is because of the policy that they pursued. They did not anticipate it. Yes, there are problems with the kind of the rhetoric that we are hearing from the Western countries, particularly from those medical organizations and medical research centers. They are projecting COVID-19 as a kind of threat which is not manageable, which is being seen by many people. But even some minority opinion is there that there is an exaggerated threat. But nonetheless, Iranians, I think they did not anticipate it, and because of that reason, they spread it in Iran, and they have suffered a lot. And then Iran actually asked for the IMF that it would be willing to avail $4 to $5 billion loan, which it deserved. Then the Americans said that we are not going to support it in the IMF, because Americans have the biggest shares in the IMF. So I think their problems have gone from bad to the worst. Inflation is already very high. There have been riots in Iran. There have been particularly riots when the government raised their petroleum charges, and there was a time when it had become unmanageable. And then the Iranian government is notorious to use excessive force against its own people when it comes to rights on economic issues. And somehow or the other, they have managed to suppress it. But certainly, it may be a lull before storm, because that resentment is there. But when it comes to the Americans in between, and that is where Iranian regime, they try to exploit the situation. They tell to their own people that they are fighting a bigger power, and that's where they need support. They try to divert everything to the conspiracies that everything is being done by the Americans and their Western allies. I think that is again an exaggerated their self-thinking, because of which they've been landing in problem one after the other.
Right, and now that we're seeing if everything needs to also be looked at from the perspective that this is an election year in the United States, what would you say is going to be President Trump's stance on Iran prior to these elections? Will it be more aggressive, or do you see some sort of relenting, some sort of an agreement, maybe some sort of a negotiation going on before that?
Well, Iranian government's policy has been to wait and see. They are hoping that there is a possibility that the President Donald Trump may not be re-elected, which I don't think is going to happen. He is most likely to be re-elected. And till then, till November, they are going to wait. But so far, Iranians have shown a lot of resistance. They are saying that we are not going to get into any negotiation with the Americans unless they reverse all those sanctions which they have reimposed on Iran after US revoked nuclear deal in 2018. So I think there is going to be a status quo from both sides. We will be hearing a lot of rhetorics coming from Iranian government, and lot of rhetoric coming from President Donald Trump, lot of rhetoric coming from Israel, whose interest Americans are watching in the Middle East. So there is going to be a kind of a stalemate. I don't expect there is going to be any solution, though the Germany and Britain in the past, they did try to come up with certain proposals whereby they can have an agreement. Basically, the Americans may agree on any possible renegotiation if Iran is ready to extend the deadline of certain clauses from 2025 to beyond, because that would give them a kind of some leverage and some hope that Iran may not manufacture nuclear bomb. But in this situation, I don't expect that there is going to be any negotiation on nuclear deal or any negotiations on lifting this very heavy economic sanctions on Iran.
Right. Thank you, Javed Rana, for being with us online to talk about the US and Iran tensions at the moment. Now we're also seeing more developments with the situation between India and Pakistan, where Pakistan is poised to approach the UN to ask for proof from India about all the claims and allegations that are being made by India that Pakistan has terror launch pads. This claim is giving them an excuse to fire across the line of control and commit multiple ceasefire violations across the line of control into Azad Kashmir, killing innocent civilian lives. We're going to be talking about that now with Asma Shakir Khwaja, who is a foreign affairs expert. Thank you for joining us, Ms. Asma.
Thank you so much.
So, is Pakistan now going to be taking this case to the UN for sure? And what result can we see out of this? Do we expect to see maybe more involvement by the UN military observer group in India and Pakistan, which we've seen very little of in this situation?
Yeah, see, Pakistan always advocates more active and rather proactive and efficient and effective role of UN military observer group in Indian occupied Kashmir and of course independent Azad Kashmir. But the problem is that India never allows free and fair observation by the UN military observers, and that is the problem. And if somehow Pakistan can convince UNO to launch a more effective role, that would be really beneficial for the issue of Kashmir and the issue of ceasefire violations, because India always blame Pakistan for one reason or another for violating LOC, but when Pakistan asks for more proactive role by UN military observers and more use of technology to see who is crossing the border and who is infiltrating in whose land, and then India just steps back and refuses to give more prominent and effective role to UN military observers. So this is, for me, it is like another evidence of India's confused policies and India's efforts to hide its policy, because we see that when there is a policy failure by Modi regime in Kashmir or anywhere in India, and instead of taking responsibility for that policy failure, they just put blame on Pakistan for under one connotation or another. And this is again a policy failure when Modi government doesn't have the stamina to face and to bear the burden of the consequences of its policies. So we can see that, and this is again when whole world is fighting with Corona and Modi regime is busy with pointing their fingers towards Pakistan, whether whether it is their flawed Corona policy or it is their flawed and policy of atrocities in Kashmir. I'm sure you know that the journalists of Kashmir, they won the international most prestigious journalism award, and instead of appreciating that, India is and this award is a symbol that international community, international media, and international conscience is realizing what is happening, the atrocities of Kashmir, and that is why. And then that those photojournalism through social media, through latest media technologies, is reaching out to the world and the people with the conscious. So
right.
getting award by those Kashmiri journalists or having it is it another embarrassment for the Indian atrocities and Modi's I would say the brutal Kashmir policy. So
right, they're being exposed. Do you think that there can be a situation where a third party may be asked to evaluate the situation? Because India never allows any journalists, any independent journalists, any international observers, or, for example, when you had US congresspersons there, they didn't allow that as well.
Yeah, I think definitely, as per the UN resolution on Kashmir 1948, UN Security Council or any person or group assigned by UN, given this task by UN Security Council, is eligible and can do this observation in Kashmir, which India would never ever allow, because we know that Modi is playing double game. One game is for domestic audience. To them, they have a different face, and for international audience, they have a different face. And access to international community or a specific assigned group to Kashmir would be would not helpful for this double face of Modi, and would bring out the atrocities and the policies of subjugations in Kashmir. I was reading today that again there is an internet ban in Kashmir. So what does exactly Modi regime is thinking, that if they, with all these months of, at least like it's been I think 6-7 months, that all these months of a complete lockdown in Kashmir, atrocities and denial of basic needs, subjugation of human rights, rather the word human rights doesn't exist in Kashmir. I was reading a statement, a tweet by the former Indian general, and he was writing that why don't Modi do carpet bombing in Kashmir after this latest incident of in Kashmir. And I was actually shocked that if the elite, or what we call intellectual elite, are thinking in the same way, and there were lots of tweets supporting that demand of carpet bombing in Kashmir. So it proves that India is trying to sustain its illegitimate rule in Kashmir, because Kashmir is considered as Indian colony. India is a colonial power in Kashmir, and
Right.
this is how colonial powers they do with the slaves, with the occupied territories. They don't care for people, the territory, and just imagine if a general is asking for the carpet bombing, it means that Modi is calculating and would be calculating more. What else? I'm like, as a student of foreign policy, I'm unable to comprehend that what else, what is left, what atrocities are left in Kashmir, what else Modi is thinking to do in
Right.
Kashmir.
Right, absolutely. Dr. Asma Shakir Khwaja, thank you so much for joining us online. It absolutely is a flagrant violation of human rights in Indian occupied Kashmir, and we've been seeing it not just since August 5th or since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, but for the last 72 years since the two countries' independence, and the people there have been suffering since then. But the good news is, as Dr. Asma also mentioned, that 3 Associated Press journalists from Kashmir have been honored with the Pulitzer Prize for their efforts in and their striking images of life in the occupied valley. They've posted images of funerals, of protests, of heavy-handedness of the Indian military against the citizens there, of human rights violations, and for that they have been recognized, and that is a huge, huge gain, a step forward for the Kashmiri people. The journalists' names are Channi Anand, Dar Yasin and Mukhtar Khan, and we congratulate them. This is definitely a huge victory for Kashmiris right now to be recognized like this. Their work and their struggle, which has been shown all over the world and is being legitimized right now by seeing these visuals all over the world, and these journalists winning the Pulitzer Prize. A wonderful development indeed. That's all the time we have for our program today. Thank you for watching us, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye from me and our team at Newsroom.